Well, welcome. We are so excited to have John Polo here with us as our grief friend for another conversation on grief. And it's so important to have these conversations. John, we met at Camp Widow.
Yep.
And I heard you speak a couple of times. And I just want you to know I was so impressed with you and your message and your ability to really communicate a powerful message and be encouraging and validating to grievers. I know that your sessions at Camp Widow are some of the most popular sessions, and we heard people talking about you. And I thought you were great before I met you, but then even now, talking to you, knowing more about you and your story and everything, it's just such an honor to have you here. And what we'd like to do is have you start out just by telling us a little bit about your story and then what you're doing too. There's so many things that you can do to support grieving people, and you've got a lot to share here, I think, in our time together. So
yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. So I met my late wife, Michelle, in high school. We grew up in the same town. We both ended up moving away an hour in different directions. So we were about 2 hours away. And we weren't really friends, but we would both go back to that town we grew up in to hang out with friends, and our friend groups kind of merged. And with that happening, we became friends. And I developed a huge crush on her. And after months, I finally got the courage to ask her out. And she said yes. And we fell in love, and we did it for a year. But we were young and we were stupid, and we had a really bad breakup. 7 years later, I was sitting at my dining room table typing up an email, and an email popped up from her. We had lost all contact for 7 years. I couldn't gather myself. I didn't really know what to do. So I got a glass of water from the refrigerator. I drank it before I read the email. And we talked for a whole year before she came to visit me. I think we were both so hurt from what happened in high school that we were very scared to engage again. So she came and visited me finally after a year of talking, and we realized we still loved each other. So we picked right back up where we had left off. We started building a life together. 2.5 years after that, she got diagnosed with one of the worst cancers you can get, an incredibly rare form of sarcoma. We had to go, to Boston and New York for second and third opinions, where we lived in Illinois at the time. I'm still here. And the doctor in New York said they see this cancer, when you consider the type of cancer it was and where it started, they see that happen like once a year in the world. And she had the cancer for 2.5 years. And, I watched my dad die of cancer in 2008. It's horrible. Right? Like, we know it's horrible. I didn't think it was possible to watch a human suffer more than I watched my dad, but Michelle did. She suffered a lot. And 2.5 years later, she passed away, January 2016. So as we do this interview, I'm coming up on almost 7 years. I was shattered. I used to say I was broken, and that's just my truth. I'm not saying about anybody else, but my truth, I used to say I was broken. And then I realized very recently, I don't really think that's true, John. I was shattered. And I was going stir crazy at the same time. I didn't know what to do with myself, let alone, my grief. And a friend suggested, a month after she passed, I was talking to a friend, and they suggested I start a blog. I had been sharing a lot on Facebook about our journey. So there was a lot of time during those 2.5 years where, Michelle was in the hospital bed or the hospice bed, and I was sitting in the room and I had nothing to do. And I would post on Facebook, about how she was, about my anticipatory grief, all of that. So a friend suggested, why don't you start a blog? Like, it seemed to be helping you when you were processing with your words before, do it again. So I had no idea how to do that. So I Googled how to start a blog, and I started one with a matching Facebook page the next day. I had no vision or desire for it to be anything that it is today. I simply wanted to process my grief and write about it. And even though it seems weird now, share it with the world for whatever reason I wanted to do it at that point. And it took off. I don't think the world was particularly used to a 31-year-old man kind of pouring his heart out on social media. So, it took off. About 18 months later, I put out my first book, and that all, has me where I'm at today. It's just grown from there. So I'm a coach, I'm a speaker, and I have 3 books out currently.
John, when you talk about coaching too, what type of people do you coach? Is it grief only or lots of different, what do you specialize in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I started, I just wanted to do grief. And what I realized very quickly is, okay, but what happens when they want to start rebuilding? We need to, if they want to start dating again, if they're going to be in a relationship, their self-esteem, their self-worth, are they self-sabotaging? Do they have fear, guilt, purpose, motivation, self-care, who they're surrounding themselves with? So I know people are always like, you got to niche down, you got to niche down. Well, I did it first, but now I kind of coach everything.
Yeah. Well, I see we talk about the whole journey, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're recognizing that it is a long journey, and you're trying to help them not just with the grief, but then rebuilding, right?
Right.
It's kind of what I hear too, and what life looks like after.
Yeah. And it goes, I primarily work with grieving people still, but I have a lot of non-grieving clients as well.
And I think they can reach you, John Polo Coaching. Is that right?
JohnPoloCoaching.com. Yep.
Okay. And where would they find your Facebook and your blog? Same place?
Yeah. So I don't actually have the blog anymore, but I have the social. I'm on every social media you can be on, which is challenging in itself. But on my website has direct links for all the social media.
Okay. And we'll certainly share your website link and your book and that as well. So, there was a word that you said, Ron, did it resonate with you? I'm wondering how many people listening to this would relate to shattered. I thought that was a really good choice. Right. Shattered, because it really does explain what happens to you. It touches all of you, doesn't it? Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Up until a couple of weeks ago, I would say I was broken, and that was true. But then I was thinking about it one day, and I'm like, when I think of the word broken, maybe this is just me, but I think about one break. Like, you can be broken with one break. There wasn't one break in me after my wife died, or even when she was sick and I knew she was going to die. I was shattered, and my life was shattered as well. And I think it's much more accurate to say that than broken, because I was truly shattered. And, one of the things that I always tell people now is, when I'm honest about the depth of my pain, when I'm honest about how bad it was to watch her be sick, to lose her, to have to live this life without her, when I'm honest about the depth of my shatteredness, is that a word? I don't know. When I'm honest about it, I can then properly give myself credit for how far I have come, and I can measure how far I have come. Whereas I feel like if we lie about our pain, if we aren't honest about the depth of the pain, then it's harder to give ourselves credit and see how far we've come.
I think so. I have this, in the shattered word brings up in my mind the idea of a lot of pieces, and then the healing process is in part kind of bringing them back together again. But the impact of the shattering or whatever is still there. Just like if you put a piece of pottery back together or whatever, you're probably going to be able to see that it was fractured, but it still may be very functional and beautiful in its own way.
I feel like, I don't know how you guys feel, I feel like I'm the best version of myself today that I've ever been. I have more depth today than I've ever had before. I'm a kinder person than I've ever been before. And I'm happy again. I'm happy again. But part of me is always going to be broken. Part of me is always going to have some brokenness to me because of what I went through and losing someone I love so much and watching her suffer so much. That's never going to fully go away. That's just my truth. I'm not saying it has to be anybody else's truth.
I think what you said there is really powerful. And I think, I don't want to speak for Ron, but I hope that people who are in the depths, of that pit of grief right now, that are thinking they will never get through this, they will never be okay, life will never be good again, can get a little bit of hope from this message, even if they can't fathom it yet. Because I would agree that now, after many years of grief and healing, I am the best version of myself. Would you agree?
I feel the same way about myself.
We have learned so much from our pain, right? That shattering, then we've rebuilt ourselves. So we are the same, but we're different. right? We are not the same people. Our life is not the same. And like you said, those cracks are still there and they're part of us, but they give you an ability to feel, I think, and experience emotions at a deeper level. And I do think they make us a lot more compassionate because we have a sensitivity to others, maybe. I don't know, but I want people to hold on to hope, because you're saying you were shattered. We were shattered. I don't think we even imagined how we could go on, and to say, wow, we're actually a better version of ourselves, that grief actually taught us a lot, right?
One of the most important things I can do, whether it's on a coaching call or I'm in front of, 10 people speaking or hundreds of people speaking, or whatever, is take them back to the moments when I didn't believe in hope. So there's a page in my second book where I say, I was once that man when the thought of hope would do nothing but fill me with rage. Not only did I not believe in hope, not only did I not want to hear about hope, if somebody tried to talk to me about hope, it would do nothing but fill me with rage. I didn't want to hear about hope as my wife was dying. I didn't want to hear about hope after she died. So it's important for people to know that we understand that level of deep despair, because otherwise what they see is, oh yeah, these three people, they're doing great. Well, I'm never going to do great. But we never thought we would breathe again, smile again, have hope again, live again. We thought it was impossible too.
Yes, you feel like you're wrecked, and it's hard to imagine a restoration process where life could be good again. Is there a point, John, where you felt hope beginning to return to you?
The moment that really sticks in my mind is the first Camp Widow. So I was 18 months out. It was my first time in San Diego, which is now my happy place. I had made a lot of social media friends through this process. I got to meet them at Camp Widow. It was my first speaking gig. And I was like, oh, I want to do this for a living now. I love this, right? I'm an introvert. So the fact that I got up in front of 200 people and liked it, that was, I didn't know that was going to happen. And I remember, so Camp Widow ends on Sunday. And I remember a couple of us extended our stay. We rescheduled our flights, we extended our stay, and we went to the beach on Monday. And I'm sitting there on the beach with, 4 or 5 new friends, and we're eating fish tacos or whatever, and we're having a drink. And it's a beautiful sunny day in San Diego. And not only did I realize that maybe life can actually potentially possibly be good again, and maybe I've stumbled upon this maybe I have a talent, maybe I can do something with this and help people. But it was the first time in the 18 months since Michelle passed that I actually realized that I wanted to live again. I had survived. I was in the survival phase for so long. And then I was in existing for even longer. And in that moment, I was like, I want to live again, right? Holy expletive, right? I want to live again. It was jarring to me, and it took me back because I had no idea what to do with it. And I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that it was a defining moment, even though I had no idea what to do with it in that moment.
Right.
I want people to hear that there is a time, just like you experienced and Ron and I did, to be in survival, right? The survival phase where you don't have hope, and it is completely normal and appropriate, right? And it has to do with the depth of the pain, and you're just trying to get through each day. We're talking to people that are saying, I can barely breathe, right? I'm just breathing. Right. And anything else is unimaginable to me. And we talk about, and we find it common, and I'm sure your clients share this with you too, Ron, that you don't want to live. It doesn't mean you would take your own life, but you wouldn't. I say if a bus hit me on the way home from work, I was just fine with that. Even if you have other beautiful things in your life, you just aren't able to appreciate them because the sorrow is just so heavy. So that's normal and appropriate, right, for a time.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, look, the ending of my first book talks about how I was planning to join her. And then at the 25th hour, but that didn't mean that I wanted to live. For a long time, I was just hanging on by a thread because the pain was so severe. And Michelle was sick for 2.5 years. And from the get-go, we knew that the cancer was going to take her life. Like there were moments of hope, but basically from the get-go, we knew it. And knowing that she was going to die towards the end, I guess, prepared me for her death. Like the last 22 days while she was in hospice, like I was prepared for her death. But even knowing she was going to die, first of all, it was an incredibly traumatic 2.5 years, what we went through.
Yes.
But knowing she was going to die did not prepare me. It prepared me for her death, possibly, but it didn't prepare me to live this life without her. Right. And that's something I didn't want to do for a very, very long time.
Yeah. I can so relate to that because I lost my wife similarly, and cancer and hospice and et cetera on down the line. And you throw so much of your stuff into caring for that person, meeting their needs to the point where you empty yourself. And then I actually experienced this tug of war within me about, on one hand, there was a relief because I was exhausted. And on the other hand, there's a giant void in my life now. I think it actually made the void feel bigger because we have been, 24/7 together for so much time. And I felt stunned. I thought, oh yeah, I'm not prepared for this at all. Yes, I was prepared for her actual death, but then I didn't think a day beyond that. And then it hit me right in the face.
Right. I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but I think this is accurate. Like we were 24/7 care.
Yes.
So us, and now we're not husbands anymore in the physical world. Like we don't have our wives here, and we're not caretakers anymore. We don't know what to do with ourselves. And it's interesting because I remember after the funeral, so we had the wake the night before, and then we have the funeral the next day. And I remember making a post. After the funeral, some of us, we went, got lunch. And I remember making a post in the car. And I guess it was in the hearse. I don't know, maybe it's fuzzy. And it was about how I felt peace in that moment. And this is, how I felt like she was finally not suffering anymore because she suffered so bad. Right. And I got to tell you, that was a very moment thing. that piece in that moment where I was like, my wife doesn't have to suffer anymore. And my personal belief is I'll see her again. That didn't last very long because the emptiness and the reality of the void hit me very quickly after that.
Yes. Yeah. Going to bed, waking up, making a meal, and you're alone. And, I think everybody's experience is unique, but I think there's some overlap with all of us where that piece of imagining the world now with that person truly gone it is very, well, that alone is traumatic in there, but there's trauma that I ended up having treated during the time of being the caretaker. And I think I see that in a lot of people now. They're not really recognizing that that's what's there. We usually will have to draw that out unless it's really severe, then they're definitely aware of it.
We found, and Ron is trained in EMDR, which has been quite successful with. It was for him and for clients that we've had. And I want to say this just in case there's anyone listening, that as they were caregivers, there were some very traumatic images that come to mind, during that time, which I wouldn't know about because mine was a sudden death. But it's interesting that once they can address that with some actual treatment, and EMDR, doesn't necessarily work for anyone, and maybe there's something else, but if someone is having those, right, Ron, those images that are disturbing, and you can speak to it better, they might want to consider looking for help processing that trauma.
Yes, finding somebody that really understands that. And there may be other modes of therapy that are helpful with that, but I've had great success with it. I do want to say, though, you were mentioning because you weren't there when your husband, Mark, passed. is that you can still have traumatic thoughts, feelings, and what am I trying to say? Even images in your mind when you haven't even actually directly experienced it. You can still have that. And if you sit back, sometimes I think we become so accustomed to it that we think that that's just a permanent feature, like, I don't know, ringing in your ears or something like that. And so I would want to say to people, there's a pretty good chance that those kinds of intrusive images, thoughts, and feelings and so forth can actually be worked through, and you don't need to feel them anymore. And that's very freeing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we would like to talk to you about a few things. When we talked to you previously, there were so many things that we knew that you could speak to, and it's hard because we could just keep you all day, John. But one of the things that I thought was really important was you were recognizing the importance of who someone chooses to surround themselves with after a loss. So could you speak to that a little bit? Because you're right, that is vital.
Yeah, I could speak all day to that. So I'll try to give you some thoughts.
Okay.
Before I answer that directly, let me kind of segue into it. So I was a caretaker my whole life. From the age of 12, when I was taking care of my mom, then my dad with cancer, then Michelle. It was about 8 months after Michelle passed. I can remember being on the floor sobbing, just on the floor sobbing. And I remember in that moment thinking to myself, you have been taking care of everyone else for nearly 2 decades. You need to take care of yourself.
Yes.
It's not even like a choice, like you have to. And one of the things that it didn't happen in that moment because I didn't know what to do with it in the moment. But eventually, what I started to do was I started to pay incredibly close attention to myself. When my wife was sick, I paid incredibly close attention to her needs. Is she in pain? Does she need a medicine? Does she need water? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I started paying close attention to myself. I started paying incredibly close attention to who I was around when I felt better, who I was around when I felt worse, what I was doing when I felt better, what I was doing when I felt worse, where I was at when I felt better, where I was at when I felt worse. And for me, one of the most important things that I have done, and I help clients with it now, is focus in on who you are around when you feel better, when you feel seen, when you feel heard, when you feel validated, when you feel respected, when you're allowed to grieve, when you're allowed to talk about hope, like when you're laughing. Who are you around when you feel that way? And if you have people in your life who make you feel the opposite, like they don't respect your pain, they're not validating you, you can't talk about your grief, you're not allowed to laugh, like, they're demeaning you, you feel invisible, pay very close attention to all of that, because that's going to affect how you grieve. It's going to affect how you find healing. It's going to affect once you start to try to live again. It's going to affect your self-esteem. It's going to affect your self-worth. It affects everything. And that's true for all humans, but I feel like it's even more important for people who are grieving.
Well said. Well said. And we do encourage people to reevaluate their relationships after a loss, right? Because their needs change and what they can give others changes too, right? And so that's very powerful. Who's having what impact on you, right? What you said, who are you feeling good with, who are you not feeling good with, and where are you? Good questions.
Yeah, excellent. Do you have, I know you've worked with a lot of people. Do you have just a personal story around that? Not so much about you, but maybe, obviously you're not going to reveal the client and you might change the details a little bit, where you've had someone and you've watched them have these realizations. For instance, like, it makes a difference what I do now, and I needed to make some choices about who I'm going to hang out with. Anything that pops into your head?
Well, one of the examples I can give you, and this happens with a lot of clients, is, let's just talk about widowed people for a second. So if you're married and, it's a healthy marriage and all that, and you're happy in that marriage, I feel like that can cause you to kind of like, I want to say this. not see other things as clearly. So let's say your mom is really toxic, right? Like your mom is, but you're like, every time you go home, like you walk into your beautiful spouse and you love them so much and everything is great. It's easier to deal with your toxic mom, and you have your spouse there, right? Like, so it's easy to be like, yeah, mom's toxic, I'm not talking to her today. But when your spouse isn't there, it shines a very bright light on that toxic person now and how they're making you feel. And also, my whole thing is like, people don't really know how to support grieving people. And I get that. You have to understand it. My whole thing is like, respect my pain. You don't have to understand it as long as you respect it. But when something has happened to us so horrible, and it's the worst thing that's ever happened to us, and we feel broken or we feel shattered, and we feel like somebody should be there for us. Our mom should support us. Our best friend from, grade school should have our back, and they're not there for us. That really shines a bright light on who do I want in my life as I move forward. And a lot of people, unfortunately, they see that and they're like, if you couldn't be there for me, or even worse, if you made my life more difficult as I was shattered, I don't think I need to carry you onto this next phase of my life.
That's a very good point.
Hence the reevaluating, right?
Yep.
And we do try to encourage people. There are ways to share what we need from the people around us, because like you said, John, they do not understand, just like I didn't understand before my husband died.
Right.
But there's some things we can do to educate them, and some will receive that and some won't, right?
Right.
Some won't. And then we need to reevaluate.
Can I say one other thing? Because I realize this. Sometimes you'll feel worse around a person or people, but they didn't do anything. So as an example, Michelle dies. I'm so proud to have her as my wife. Like, walking the world with her was the best thing ever. Now I'm walking the world alone. It was the worst thing ever. Being around other couples made me feel worse, but they're not doing anything. So that mean that I should be around them or shouldn't be around them. Each case needs to be evaluated on its own. But it's also important to, not only see who I'm around when I feel better, who I'm around when I feel worse, but why do I feel that way as well?
I love that. Why? And to give yourself permission, wouldn't you agree that, like you said, they're not doing anything, but if you're very fragile and that's tough for you right now, it is okay, right? To back off from those things that are just very painful for you at the moment.
Yeah.
I felt like just a fish out of water anytime I went to a couples event after my husband died. It's something I would be comfortable with now, but there was a while that was just not a good place to be. And it's okay to skip those things, isn't it? Wouldn't we?
Yeah, we like to work with people and tell them you need to give yourself permission for a lot of different things, and certainly not, abhorrent behavior, but you're not going to function as well. You may not be able to handle a social event. You might not be any fun tonight. You might have to pull out of an invitation and say, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I thought I could when we made the date.
So I'd like to mention an example of that, because I know sometimes we're talking about all losses, right? Obviously, we lost our spouses, but this applies to all of them. But I think of, because I've had clients like this, they've lost their child.
Yes.
Right? They've lost their child. And then they're invited to another child's birthday party. And they're thinking, well, I got to go because that's my friend and I have to go. But it's killing them, right? To go. It's so painful. It's reminding them, and it's just like pouring salt in the wound. Yet they feel like they're supposed to support their friend, and they're not being a friend if they don't do this. And we try to walk with them and say, there's a time and a place to say, I care about you, but this is too painful for me. And I hope you understand.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a piece I wrote about this a couple of years ago. I don't remember the exact verbiage I used, but something along the lines of, it's so painful for us to see other couples out or other families out. And it's not about jealousy. It's not about ill will. It's just a reminder clear in your face about what you had and what in the physical world you don't have anymore.
Right.
And that pain, you feel shattered all over again, bringing you to your knees. So again, it's, I got to be honest, like grieving people are the best at giving themselves grace. I wasn't either, right? But like, we have to give ourselves grace. We have to let ourselves off the hook sometimes. And, not in a bad way. It doesn't mean that it's an excuse for bad behavior. But no, you don't have to go to that birthday party if you know that, it's going to hurt your heart that much. You can give yourself the grace of saying, I can't do this today.
Yeah.
Love the word grace. We use it too. Give yourself grace, because what do we hear when we do these things? Like, oh, you're doing well. That's great, right? People like us to go to these things and when they think we're doing well, and they encourage us. So we get this message that we should often be doing better than we really are. And so we think we should be able to do these things. And we're telling people, no, there's a time where this stuff is just too painful. And that's
Right.
okay.
Right.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Yep.
I had another note from what we talked about, your question about, I think you said, did you answer this? The question was, who am I now after the loss? Is
Right.
that one of your questions that you'd like to help people answer?
I mean, so I do an entire workshop on that. So I do an entire 90-minute workshop on that. I'll give you a couple thoughts. So I'm not saying this is true for every person. It was true for me, and 99% of the widow people I've talked to about this, it has been true for them as well. And I'm sure other, types of loss as well. So for me, when Michelle passed, like a part of me went with her and a part of me died with her. And I was like a stranger to myself. Again, like I wasn't a husband in the physical world. I wasn't a caretaker anymore. Like I didn't know what to do with myself. I lost people. I lost friends, some family went away, hobbies that I loved before I no longer had an interest in. I felt like my identity was ripped from me. There was a day, I'm going to tell you a quick story. So it was Memorial Day, and it was about 4 months after Michelle passed, and I was by my sister's house, and I was doing okay that day. Right before she's about to serve the food, in walks a young couple with a baby, and it hurt my heart, right? Because they were about Michelle and my age, and Michelle had a miscarriage. So there was a lot going on there for me in that moment. And my sister didn't do anything wrong. I want to make that really clear. She didn't do anything wrong. But I don't remember their names. Let's say it was Joe and Nikki. So my sister said, John, these are my new neighbors, Joe and Nikki. And she said, this is my brother, John. I didn't have my wife, Michelle, there. It wasn't John and Michelle. I didn't have my stepdaughter that day. It wasn't even, this is my brother, John. He's a widower. He just lost his wife. Or this is my brother, John. He has a kid. She's just not here today. It was just John. And again, she didn't do anything wrong. But in that moment, I got to tell you, it killed me. I felt like my identity as a husband, as a father, was ripped from me. And I went home and I wrote this piece that's in my first book. And it's entitled, It Bothers Me When. And I just like poured my heart out in that piece. And I took that. And as I started the coaching years later, I realized that this is true for most people, most widowed people. I'm not sure about everybody grieving, but we do feel like we lose our identity. And what happens is when we have that moment, whether it's one light bulb moment or many gradual moments, when we have come to that moment where we realize, I want to live again, but I don't know what that means. The other part of that is we're still like a stranger to ourselves, most of us. So not only do we not know what living again means, how are we going to know what we want if we're still like a stranger to ourselves? So figuring out like who you are now is a part of the rebuilding process for many of us.
That's very insightful. I completely agree with you, and both from the standpoint of what I've experienced, what I see with clients, but also from a therapeutic standpoint, we really have to stand back because, as you were saying, when Michelle died, part of you died too. And I think that's a very realistic statement because a significant relationship like that, you're so intertwined. The only way you could be just the same would be if you didn't have that level of intimacy and connection. So I think it's very fair to say that part of you dies, but I would also say that person also lives on in a certain way in our own mind and memory. They're still with us because it doesn't all go away. Thankfully, that would be horrible. That would be a terrible loss. We remember, and there's feelings around that, and they will continue to come up for the rest of our lives when those things happen. I do think it is different depending on the kind of relationship. It's the closeness, it's the level of intimacy where you feel more out of touch with who you really are because part of it's gone, as we were saying. I think that can be very true. Let's say you lose a child, your only child, and not just your only child, but it's particular. Then I always knew myself as so-and-so's dad. I always knew myself in this area. And if you lose a parent when they're 98 years old and they were really ready to go and they had a wonderful life and et cetera, that can still be painful. It should be painful. But at the same time, there's a level of understanding. And I think there's been an anticipatory thing going on, and there's a little bit of letting go, I think, that is there as well, because we do separate and go our own way normally as children. We worked with someone recently who, she was a nun and she was never married and she lived with her mom and they were like best friends. So to her, losing her mom at a somewhat expected time and from a chronic illness and so forth, you'd say, oh yeah, well, you could be kind of ready for that. But no, she lost such a big part of her life in that particular case. It was very difficult for her. Different because of where the relationship was, not exactly that it was a mother and daughter, which would be very different in different cases.
Absolutely. I mean, there's two thoughts. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, there's just two thoughts I had. First off, absolutely. Like I always tell people, Michelle, her memory and her love walk in my heart, in my mind, everywhere I go.
Right.
And until the day I die. Like she's with me in that way. I carry her love and memory with me. 100%. You know, my dad died in 2008 and I was 24. And he was my best friend. He was my hero. The loss, when I look at like my stepdaughter who lost her mom when she was 9, there's a fundamental difference in that loss. My loss was horrible. Like my dad was my guy, right? Like it was horrible, but to be a grown man. Whereas kids who lose their parent at a young age, they didn't get that parent for a quarter, for 5 years. They didn't get to that age where they're a grown individual where they had their parents. So I think there's a difference when you lose a parent, depending on what age you are too.
Exactly.
Not saying it was easy,
Absolutely.
but if I lost at 9, it would have been much more difficult.
Right.
And we are so cautious about telling people, don't compare your losses, right? Because they're all awful. They're all awful. And we all experience our grief in our own way. And I've even worked with clients, they're adults who lost their elderly parents, right? But they talk to them every day. And they had a beautiful relationship. And they were even taking care of them. And we find this, if they're their caregiver too, that when the parent dies, the adult child is lost because their identity was caring maybe for the parent, right? Keeping an eye on them, or they don't have that person who would always counsel them. I mean, so it's terrible no matter what. It's just.
Can I give you a little analogy I use with clients sometimes? So let's say that they're in a small town somewhere, there are two 26-year-old women, okay? And on the same day, they both lose their dad, right? One of the 26-year-old woman was incredibly close to her dad. Like they were best friends. They had a great relationship. Her dad passes suddenly. The other 26-year-old woman, the dad abandoned the family when she was 4. She never really knew her dad. I'm not saying all of society, but a lot of society would be like, oh, the 26-year-old who was close to her dad, that's horrible. And the other girl, they would think, well, she didn't really know her dad. It must not be that big of a deal. Yes, it is. The complication that comes with, that type of abandonment or relationships where there's abuse or that type of thing. Yes, it is. And it's not that it's better. It's not that it's worse. It's not any of that. But it can even be more complicated sometimes, right? So like we don't have to even have beautiful relationships to grieve and grieve very deeply.
That's a very good point. If you're estranged from your parent or your child and you lose them, that's heartbreaking often. Right. And I love the way you're saying that, because I think until you're the person that's experiencing it, you just can't imagine, which is why we really need to ask grievers, where are you at? What are you experiencing? What is this like for you? Not something we're usually not very comfortable asking. Right. So what we like to end our time with is, now with your experience from your own loss and working with your many clients and coming in contact with so many grieving people, John, what are some things, it could just be a couple things, but what are some things that you would want any grieving person to know? What do you think is important for them to know?
Yeah, I'll rattle off a couple of things that pop in my head because I can give you a million, right?
Right, I know.
That, we can grieve as we move forward, and we can move forward as we grieve. It's a very simplistic concept, and it's 100% true. But I think that many in society don't know that truth. And because of that, then many grievers don't know that truth, right? So we can grieve as we move forward, and we can move forward as we grieve, right? And the truth is, like, we move forward with every step that we take, even when we're just purely in survival mode. And we're just purely like putting one foot in front of another. We are moving forward. So I think that's one thing. Another is everyone knows like grief is not linear. Like we all know that. But the thing people don't talk about as much is that rebuilding is not linear either. Like it's so incredibly hard. And it's not a linear process. It's, sometimes it is 5 steps forward, 18 steps back. Sometimes it is that, you have worked so hard. You've been hanging on by a thread to survive. And then you've been existing for so long. And now you want to try to live again, but you don't know how. Or you're making the efforts to rebuild your life, but you're not getting to the place you want to be. And maybe the people in your life aren't fully seeing your efforts, because oftentimes the society just sees the results. Where is this person? Are they happy? Are they rebuilding? How are they doing? They don't see the effort behind it, right? I have clients who, they're putting effort in and effort in and effort in, and a lot of them are happy again and they're living a life they like again. But a lot of them are experiencing what I experienced, which is roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And I would keep knocked down, and I had to keep getting back up. But I'm so thankful that I did keep getting back up. And then we could go on for days, but I'll say 2 more quick things. I think we live in a world that oftentimes is not going to validate your pain, which makes it that much more important that you validate your own pain and you empower yourself enough to grieve your own way. When we empower ourselves enough to grieve our own way, what we're doing is we're setting the stage for once we want to actually live again, we can start living our own way as well. Because the people, if you have received any kind of judgment for your grief, those are usually the same people who are going to try to judge you for how you're rebuilding and how you want to live again. And then the last thing I'll say is something we talked about earlier, which is if you see people like the 3 of us, right? And you're watching this and you're like, that's wonderful for you 3, but it's never going to happen for me. The 3 of us thought the same thing.
Yes, we did.
Yes, we did.
We sure did.
Message that we can all do when we have clients or speaking gigs or whatever, because otherwise people just think, yeah, that's nice for you. We thought the same thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That great spot to leave it.
I think that is a beautiful place to end there. I think we'd like to talk to you again sometime and learn more about your books. And I'm sure there's a lot more, and I'm sure we're going to bump into each other at a future Camp Widow or somewhere.
John, I know it's johnpolocoaching.com, and we're going to include all the links. They'll be on screen and they'll be in our written content as well. And what is the name of your book?
Yes, I have 3 books out. They are on my website. So if you don't have pen handy, you don't have to remember the name. The first one is Widowed, Rants, Raves, and Randoms. The second one is Widowed to Now I Live. And the third one is How to Date a Widow 101. I know a lot of people will say, I don't have an attention span. That's why I wrote the books the way I did. They are for people who have no attention span like me. So even if you don't have an attention span, give them a chance. You can get through them, I promise.
They sound very inviting. So, and I love you have a beautiful way of presenting these thoughts, John. It's so sincere, you're authentic, and it's just a delight to be able to have this conversation with you. So continue doing this great work. Thank you very, very much.
It was great talking to you today.
Great to see you again.